On January 2, 1915, Britain's War Council urgently met after Grand Duke Nicholas Nikolaevich pleaded for relief for the Russian Caucasus Army encircled at Sarikemish. The Royal Navy had already pounded Ottoman positions across Mesopotamia, Aden, the Gulf of Aqaba, the Gulf of Alexandretta, and the Dardanelles, but these actions stirred no change in the Caucasus. Field Marshal Kitchener resolved that only a threat against Istanbul could loosen the siege, and ordered the First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill, to plan a daring naval attack against the Dardanelles. Churchill raised the stakes with not just a naval bombardment, but a bold plan to force warships through the heavily armed and mined Dardanelles into the Sea of Marmara and capture Istanbul, ending the war with the Ottomans once and for all. Little did the Entente know that they were about to ignite one of humanity's greatest disasters at Gallipoli. This video is sponsored by you. Unfortunately, the YouTube environment is not great right now, with the algorithm being friendlier to drama and react channels and YouTube being permissive of AI slop. We don't do drama and we don't do AI, but thanks to our members and patrons, our channel continues to make 3 public videos per week, with the team intact and going strong. In recognition of their generosity and contributions, members and patrons receive 2 additional exclusive videos each week, and access many other perks. Join them to watch more than 250 exclusive videos covering every era of history by pressing the join button under the video or the links in the description and pinned comment. On January 11th, Vice Admiral Sackville-Carden proposed a 4-stage plan to force the Dardanelles. First, his ships would force the Straits open with overwhelming force, silencing the outer fortifications and shielding the minesweepers. Second, they would neutralize interior defenses as far as Cafés. Third, they would attack the Narrows, clearing its minefield and batteries. Finally, they would break into the Sea of Marmara. With the Straits under Allied control, Britain and France could ferry troops and supplies through the Black Sea to coordinate eastern attacks with Russia against Germany and Austria-Hungary. Likewise, Russian grain could feed Allied troops on the Western Front. Carden's plan was approved on January 13th, with France lending full support. By early February 1915, the Entente assembled an armada at the Mudros harbour, 14 British and 4 French battleships, led by HMS Queen Elizabeth, the largest and most modern warship, with 8 15-inch guns. Their combined firepower totaled 274 heavy and medium guns. The Royal Marines, the 29th British Division, and the Anzac Corps were earmarked for the seizure of Istanbul. Selecting the warships was based on a simple formula: a sufficient number of Entente battleships and battle cruisers with adequate speed, armour and guns were needed to counter the German high seas fleet at all times. This left many older ships, slower, lighter armoured and less heavily armed, to be dispatched to secondary theatres such as the Mediterranean or the Dardanelles. With 16 ships already scheduled for scrapping in 1915, the plan favoured using these expendable pre-dreadnoughts in the operation, as their losses would not upset the naval balance of power. Churchill hoped that sacrificing them would achieve victory. However, regardless of their obsolescence, captains felt a personal attachment to their old warships and would hesitate to lose them. The Dardanelles stretch 41 miles from the Mediterranean to the Sea of Marmara. The Ottomans and Germans concentrated defence along a 14-mile segment from the Mediterranean to the Narrows, with gun batteries, searchlights, and hundreds of mines making the straits impassable. Outer defences consisted of 2 forts at the Gallipoli end and 2 on the Asiatic shore, each armed with 19 outdated guns with a range of 5.5 to 14 kilometres. Additionally, 4 field howitzers at Tekabirnu could reach 16 kilometres. Cafés Point held 4 forts on the south shore and 1 on the north, overlooking the minefield. At the Narrows, 5 forts lined the north bank and 6 on the south, housing 72 heavy and medium guns. The forts were plainly visible, with few gun shields or protective features for the crews. Range-finding, artillery observation, and fire control depended on telephone wires that were vulnerable to fire. Gunners were poorly trained, and ammunition was scarce. Thus, Germany dispatched Lieutenant General Erich Weber, Vice Admiral Guido von Usedom, several specialists, and 500 men to reinforce the Dardanelles and Bosphorus in August 1914. By March 1915, most batteries were manned by German crews, and 3 additional lines of mines were laid, along with extra quick-firing guns and searchlights. Naval operations began February 19, 1915, as the Entente attempted to destroy the outer forts around Sedul Bahir and Kum Kale. HMS Cornwallis and Vengeance outranged them with impunity, but failed to land direct hits on their guns. High seas and bad weather delayed the next attack until the 25th. This time, the fleet came within range of the fort guns, and the HMS Agamemnon was severely damaged. The bombardment silenced the fort guns, as the Ottomans abandoned the outer defences, allowing Royal Marines to land and destroy the guns unopposed. Faulty intelligence and bad weather extended minesweeping operations until March 2nd. The inner shore batteries were dug in around emplacements and augmented by mobile German-led artillery. On March 2nd, British ships bombarded the Narrows as the French moved up the Gulf of Saros to bomb the Belair area. The Entente ships faced fire from both sides in a desperate duel. On March 4th, HMS Irresistible attempted an amphibious assault at Kumkella, but was driven back after 23 Royal Marines died. By the 5th, the Narrows attack intensified. A direct hit on the cruiser Amethyst killed 20 French sailors. Minesweepers, often fishing trawlers with minesweeping gear and some steel plating crewed by fishermen from naval reserves, were demoralized, as their drafts were deeper than the minefields, and enemy fire remained unsilenced. To mitigate this, Carden sent them to work at night, but Ottoman searchlights proved effective. On the 7th night of minesweeping, the approach was altered. The minesweepers would sweep past the minefield and return. The terrified fishermen failed, and one trawler struck a mine. On the 13th, Carden replaced the fishermen with naval volunteers, and sent 7 trawlers escorted by Amethyst. 2 trawlers lost gear, 1 lost its entire crew, 2 rammed another, and Amethyst took a hit, killing 19 sailors. On the 17th, Carden resigned due to ill health, handing command to Rear Admiral John de Robeck. Robeck organised 3 firing lines. Line A would approach within 14,000 yards to duel the Narrows forts. Once silenced, Line B would move in within 10,000 yards to lend support, and Line C would stand by to relieve Line A. Unbeknownst to the Entente, the Ottomans laid a new mine line across Erincourt Bay on the night of March 17th. At 11 AM on the 18th, HMS Queen Elizabeth led the 4 largest British ships of Line A to maintain fire on the Narrows from Erincourt Bay. At 12:30, Robeck ordered 4 French ships to pass the Narrows. Despite 8 15-inch and 32 12-inch guns bearing on the forts, Ottoman crossfire inflicted heavy damage on Gaulois, Suffren, Agamemnon, and Inflexible. Entente fire reduced Ottoman counterfire, and by 1325 Robeck withdrew the French ships and brought forward Line C. At 1354, Bouvet struck a mine in Erincourt Bay and capsized within 2 minutes, with 639 crewmen lost. As the attack continued, Inflexible struck a mine at 1600, followed by Irresistible. Ocean was sent to assist Irresistible, but also struck a mine. Ottoman guns hit Suffren, killing 20 sailors, and nearly sinking her before her crew flooded the gun magazine. Gaulois took multiple hits and began to list. Inflexible retired, and Ocean and Irresistible's crews were rescued, as Robeck ordered a withdrawal. As the last Entente ships limped from the Dardanelles, the Ottomans claimed the first Ottoman victory of the Great War. The Entente lost 3 battleships, with 3 more severely damaged, and over 1,000 dead, with hundreds more wounded. The Ottoman inner gun batteries remained largely intact. Minefields between Kepes Point and the Narrows were mostly undisturbed, with about 150 casualties. Following the naval disaster, the War Council decided to shelve further naval attacks. On February 19th, Sir Ian Hamilton, commander of the Mediterranean Expeditionary Force, convinced Lord Kitchener that the Straits could not be forced by the Navy alone. On February 22nd, Kitchener agreed to commit 78,000 men, led by Hamilton, to capture the Gallipoli Peninsula and clear the way for the Navy to pass into the Sea of Marmara. The Australian and New Zealand Corps, Anzac, was formed and led by Lieutenant General Sir William Birdwood. They were joined by the 29th British Division, the Royal Naval Division, and Corps d'Expéditionnaires d'Orient. The Entente took a month to prepare the Gallipoli invasion, facing a colossal logistical challenge. They needed transport ships to convey troops, artillery, munitions, work animals, provisions, and other supplies. To provide beach landing craft, British officers scouted Mediterranean ports for available small craft, alerting Ottoman and German intelligence. Piers and pontoons had to be constructed and transported to the landing beaches, alongside military engineers, medical staff, and hospital ships. The Entente fleet and troops assembled at Mudros and were readied by April 19th, but poor weather delayed the landing operations until April 25th. Hamilton planned to concentrate forces on the southern Gallipoli peninsula at Cape Helles and Sedul Bahir, expecting unopposed landings. To deceive the Ottomans, the Entente would stage feints at the northern and southern extremes of the theatre. For the landings, the MEF was divided into 3 groups. The British would land at 5 beaches on Cape Helles, supported by French forces at Cumcalla, before reinforcing at Cape Helles. The Anzacs would land around Anzac Cove, to cut off Ottoman forces at Bahir and prevent reinforcements from reaching Cape Helles. The strategy relied on simultaneous attacks to overwhelm Ottoman defences. The Entente also severely underestimated Ottoman capacity and will to fight, influenced by their performance in the Italo-Turkish War and the Balkans campaigns. Ottoman Minister of War Enver Pasha, fearing another defeat after losing the Third Army in the Caucasus, reorganized the Dardanelles forces into a unified Ottoman Fifth Army under General Otto Liman von Sanders, with many German officers. With a full month to prepare, Liman concentrated 50,000 troops in defensive positions, 2 divisions at Besika Bay and 3 divisions on the Gallipoli Peninsula at Cape Helles, Anaburin and Belair. The bulk of the Ottoman force stayed inland in reserve, divided into 3 groups, ready to move to Belair, Gabatepe or the Asiatic shore. In 5 weeks of respite, the defenders built roads, acquired small boats, dug trenches, emplaced guns, and laid barbed wire and minefields right up to the eve of the invasion. At 400 on the 25th, the 3rd Australian Brigade mistakenly landed 1.6 kilometers north of Beach Z. Instead of open beaches, they faced steep cliffs and ridges, but also encountered only 2 Ottoman companies, which quickly retreated. The 1st and 2nd Australian Brigades, followed by the New Zealand and Australian divisions, landed around Aribunu but soon became entangled and were unable to organise a coordinated inland push. The broken terrain forced small, disjointed advances, with units losing contact amid ravines, spurs, and dense scrub. A seesaw battle raged over the hill called Baby 700 for much of the day. Anzac forces attacked on high ground, while crossing McClurin's Hill to assault 400 Plateau under fire from Baby 700. 400 Plateau was divided into Johnston's Jolly, Owen's Gully, and Lone Pine. The original plan to cross 400 Plateau and neutralize Gun Ridge was disrupted by unseen artillery on Lone Pine. Ottoman forces from Scrubby Knoll and Gun Ridge launched counterattacks, forcing the Anzac line to form from Owen's Gully to Bolton's Ridge. In the afternoon, Lieutenant General Mustafa Kemal led over 10,000 men in multiple counterattacks. 5 successive Ottoman assaults against Baby 700 forced the defenders to withdraw through the neck by 1630, and the Ottomans pushed a wedge between Baby 700 and 400 Plateau. Ottoman attacks drove defenders toward the western slope of 400 Plateau, as others withdrew toward the beachhead. By 1900, Ottoman forces targeted Malone's Gully and the neck, isolating Walker's Ridge. At 2200, Ottoman forces charged Bolton's Ridge, but a bayonet counterattack by the Australian 8th Battalion repelled them. By nightfall, both sides had sustained heavy casualties and largely halted offensive operations. Approximately 16,000 Anzac troops had landed, establishing a beachhead along Bolton's Ridge, across 400 Plateau and into the Monash Valley, with a brief continuation toward Pope's Hill and Walker's Ridge. Casualties stood at around 20% for the Anzac force, with over 500 dead and about 2,500 wounded. The landing at Cape Helles would be initiated without adequate communication between land and sea, resulting in costly missteps. The 29th British Division was tasked with 5 beaches, S, V, W, X and Y, with inland objectives including Krithia and the heights of Achibaba. Before the main landings, diversions were staged at Belair, Cumcalla and Besika Bay. 11 troop ships with escorts bombarded Belair and simulated landings, while Bernard Freyberg swam ashore to scout the beach, only to find Ottoman dummy defences. 6 French troop transports at Besika Bay conducted a similar ruse, forcing the Ottomans to reinforce the area until the 29th. At Cumcalla, a naval bombardment preceded a landing by the French Mixed Colonial Regiment, which quickly captured the fort and village with relatively few casualties, only to face Ottoman counterattacks and French re-embarkations. By the 27th, the French had suffered 778 casualties, while the Ottomans had taken 1,730. At V Beach, between the old fort of Sed el Bahir and the ruined lighthouse, the 1st Royal Dublin Fusiliers, 2 Munster companies and a Hampshire regiment, aboard the Trojan horse River Clyde and its tows, began landing at 6:30. Fire from fortifications and from Sed el Bahr produced severe casualties, as many men drowned or were killed when boats grounded. Of the initial wave, about 300 of the roughly 700 landed troops were killed. The River Clyde and Argyll's floating bridge attempt failed, and by 9:30, Hamilton, aboard HMS Queen Elizabeth, ordered the landing suspended and diverted to W Beach. By 1900, 120 men managed to push along the right flank towards the fort, but were repulsed. The attackers found themselves unable to make further progress. Still, by the 27th, the defenders had suffered a further 575 casualties. W Beach presented a more fortified challenge, with mines, barbed wire, underwater tripwires, trenches, and 2 hidden machine gun posts atop cliffs, all manned by the 3rd Battalion of the 26th Turkish Regiment. At 600, the 1st Battalion Lancashire Fusiliers battled ashore from HMS Euryalus and Implacable, advancing through entanglements and capturing trenches aided by naval bombardment. Hill 114 was taken by 11:30, while Hill 138 was only partially secured, as troops were pinned down on the way to its crest. At 1700, the disaster at V prompted units from W to help capture Fort 1 on the cliffs above V. However, Ottoman defences stiffened, and by the day's end, the attackers established a line between Hill 114 and 138. S Beach saw only a single Ottoman platoon guarding the shore, with a further inland presence positioned back. 4 trawlers towed 3 South Wales Borderers companies, who landed successfully around Eski Hasalik by 800. Rather than exploiting a rear attack on Sed el Bahr, under the misbelief that 2,000 Ottoman troops were about to counterattack, the commander chose to consolidate his position. A small number of Ottoman defenders guarded Beach X, and the 2nd Royal Fusiliers landed unopposed by 7:30, linking with W to press Hills 114, 138 and 141. However, 2 battalions were withdrawn to reinforce Y and S, permitting Ottoman counterattacks on the left flank and threatening troops within a few yards of the shore at X. Despite being outnumbered, the Fusiliers held their perimeter. Y Beach was the most favourable, undefended at the waterline, while Ottoman forces stood inland about a mile away. Naval and landing forces, battleships Goliath, Amethyst, Sapphire, Dublin, Transport N2 and 8 trawlers landed the Plymouth Battalion, the King's Own Scottish Borderers and a company of the 2nd Battalion South Wales Borderers by 5:45. They advanced into positions between Gully Ravine and Krithia by 1500, but at 1600 an Ottoman battalion counterattacked from Seraphim Farm, inflicting heavy casualties. Still, by dawn, the British held a substantial beachhead. At 700 on the 26th, the Ottomans renewed their assault, tearing into the centre of the British line. And with no reserves, the British managed a bayonet counterattack that routed the attackers, who suffered a 50% casualty rate. However, the beach perimeter was untenable, and by 1100 the troops began re-embarking and abandoning Y. By dawn on Monday the 26th of April, the British held 4 of their 5 landing sites at Cape Helles. The landings at S and X were successful, the one at Y failed, and those at V and W were extremely costly. Communication failures between land and sea markedly hampered coordination. At the end of the first day, the British had secured a beachhead, but at a terrible price: over 2,000 British casualties at Cape Helles. In comparison, Ottoman forces reported about 1,898 casualties themselves. The intensity of Ottoman resistance had surprised the attackers and denied the British their objective of seizing the high ground of Acibaba. The Entente failed to exploit the situation, allowing the Ottomans time to reinforce the area, preparing the battlefield for one of the worst campaigns of World War I. The continuation of this campaign and more will be coming up in this series in the coming weeks, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our patrons and YouTube members can watch more than 200 exclusive videos. Join their ranks via the link in the description or by pressing the join button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.